Okay, good morning. So this morning we're going to be doing the unseen poem Follower by Seamus Heaney. So if you'd like to start by writing down the title, how can I analyse and understand the unseen poem Follower? Okay, so we should do what we always normally do when we are looking at an unseen poem, and that is to write down the title Follower and annotate the title. So what you should do is just consider what that word could mean, what are the connotations of being a follower, what type of person would normally follow another person? What is the opposite to following? It's always worth considering what the opposite to the word is, because often titles can be almost deliberately misleading or ironic as well. And also, how could it be a positive thing as well as a negative thing? So you should pause the video now, write down your ideas, give yourself enough time, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then resume the video when you're ready to carry on. Okay, so we are going to have a little look at a Wordle that is composed of all of the words that are contained within the poem. What you should do when looking at this Wordle is consider what the poem's themes and tone are. Also consider what the poem is about, and just a stretch and challenge question, how could the words used relate to the theme of nature? So here is the Wordle. You should pause the video now and give yourself enough time to attempt the task that I've just laid out for you. One final thing to perhaps consider is how words might be clustered or grouped together or linked together. So we should potentially look for some semantic fields. Just to recap, a semantic field is a group of words that link to a particular theme or idea. So pause the video now, give yourself 2 or 3 minutes to attempt that task. Okay, so hopefully you noticed some patterns there. There is a semantic field of nature if we have a little look. So we've got words such as sod, words such as furrow, horse plough, and particularly there's a link to not just nature but also labour. If we look at words like plough, furrow, plough again, horses, that we can link to labour as well. You may well have noticed as well, or thought, that these words link to labour on a farm or working in that sort of environment. There's also a mixture of positive and negative imagery. We've got words like stumbling, close, tripping. There's almost this element of clumsiness that seems to come through, which will make more sense when we actually read the poem. Okay, so onto the poem itself now. So I'm going to read through the poem, and then we're going to attempt the next task, which is just going to be looking at analysing some of the main ideas. So here we go. My father worked with a horse plough. His shoulders globed like a full sail strung between the shafts and the furrow. The horse strained at his clicking tongue. An expert, he would set the wing and fit the bright steel pointed sock. The sod rolled over without breaking. At the head rig, with a single pluck of reins, the sweating team turned round and back into the land. His eye narrowed and angled at the ground, mapping the furrow exactly. I stumbled in his hob-nailed wake, fell sometimes on the polished sod. Sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising to his plod. I wanted to grow up and plough, to close one eye, stiffen my arm. All I ever did was follow, in his broad shadow, round the farm. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping always. But today, it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. Okay, so powerful poem by the famous Seamus Heaney. You may well have looked at some of his poems before. He's a very popular poet of choice, particularly looking for unseen poems. He's not someone that does feature on on our anthology though, for AQA. Anyway, what I would advise doing, first and foremost, is without any help or assistance at all, is attempt your own analysing. So, do you notice any particular language techniques that have been used? Are there any particularly poignant or powerful quotations that stand out? What can we say about the structure? So have a look at the stanzas. How many stanzas are there? Could that be symbolic of something? How do the stanzas flow between each other? Do they flow between each other? These are questions we should consider when analysing. Always, 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 you must look for what that possibly means, though, or what you can infer from that. And this is one of the hardest skills in English. It's to comment on the unseen, if you like, or the hidden. And that's what we talk about when we infer meaning. There is always going to be a mixture of obvious things, but more importantly, there are hidden things within this that are completely your own ideas and your own interpretation. There is no right or wrong idea, and it's really important to consider that when doing unseen poetry, which is why I recommend you attempt your own analysis before moving through this video onto the more scaffolded questions that I'm going to be providing. So give yourself approximately 5 minutes to annotate the poem and try and find as many ideas as you can relating to language, structure, and form. Once you've done that, resume the video. Okay, so just going to do a little pair task now. Obviously, you're probably going to be on your own for this, so it's not going to be a pair task. These PowerPoints are generally what I use for my lessons, so please do consider that. But a useful practice can be to map out the poem in stanzas, so sort of just summing up what happens in each stanza. If you're really struggling, just try and document what is happening in each stanza. What is the story? What's the narrative? What's going on? And that can potentially help you to understand what is actually going on. So all you need is just a brief summary of what happened. So for example, we go back to stanza 1. What is happening on stanza 1? We simply just get an outline of the father doing his job. He's using a horse plow. It's very descriptive of the father and his appearance. And they use quite powerful and emotive imagery to do that. This sort of continues into the second stanza, but it goes into more specific details about the processes that he's going through with regards to rolling the sod and other activities. Again, this continues into the third, so there's not too much to say in regards to that. We're generally following the same pattern. But it does begin to shift suddenly when we get to stanza 4. The focus shifts from stanza 1, 2, and 3, the 4, from talking about his father to talking about himself. So here he's suddenly talking about his own movements. We can assume that he's perhaps young, which is why he's so inexperienced and not as good as his father at this job. And there's a real contrast. Oh, apologies. There's a real contrast in imagery between how the father does things in stanzas 1, 2, and 3, and how he is doing things. So even if we pick out words such as his shoulders globed, an expert, there's very specific language that's being used, very precise. When it gets to him in stanza 4, we get words like stumbled, fell sometimes. Lots of uncertainty begins to creep in stanza 4 when he's talking about his own performance. And then it goes on to, in the 5th stanza, just giving us a bit of context behind that, he wanted to grow up like his dad and plough like him. And all he ever did was follow in his broad shadow there being quite a powerful image of almost being unable to match up to his father. And then we get a real shift in the final stanza where he sort of sums up his own performance. I was a nuisance, tripping and falling. But now, and we assume a substantial amount of time has passed since this memory of him working underneath his dad, it's his father who is stumbling behind him. Perhaps we can infer that that's because he's old and struggling in the latter years of his life. So this poem generally can be sort of summed up as a commentary on the relationship between a father and son, culminating in how that dynamic shifts as the years go on. Okay, so just a bit of scaffolded questioning now if you are struggling with the poem and you struggle to find your own ideas. I've composed some questions here that will hopefully help you to gain a deeper understanding behind the poem and annotate some quotations. So we're going to start with the title, as we did at the beginning of this lesson. Why do you think the title of the poem is so important now you've read it? Who is the follower? Is he referring to himself or his father, or is it a mixture of both? Is it that we all follow each other in some way? Something to think about. What impression do you get of the sun? Try and get quotations that really sum up the sun and how he feels or how he compares to his father. When we're analysing poetry, especially unseen poetry, if you can find any juxtapositions or contrasts within the poem, it can be a really easy way to get yourself some acknowledgement for talking about structure and how structure shifts within the poem. What is Heaney implying with the simile? His shoulders globed like a full sail strung between the shafts and the furrow. What is the effect of this imagery? Now, if you're struggling with specific quotations like that, I will recommend going to genius.com, typing this poem in, and seeing what the general internet population have annotated in this poem. What ideas have they got? That will hopefully give you some guidance and some help. How does Heaney show the dominance over his father? The dominance of his father over the land and earth. Pick out keywords, key quotations that really show how in control of his job and the earth itself his father is. And again, linking back to my previous point, how does that contrast with the poet's own control over the earth? In the first 3 verses, what do you learn about what the son admires about his father? Try and find quotations to justify your points. Okay, so there's some questions there for you to think about, and will hopefully help you gain a much deeper understanding of the poem. A few more questions as we go to the second half of the poem. What does it mean to follow in someone's shadow? Is it a good thing? What do you notice about the rhyme pattern in the final stanza? So, is there any rhyme in the final stanza? Is there any rhyme anywhere else? If so, why? If there's a sudden shift, why is there that shift? Is there any half rhyme? Now, half rhyme can be quite powerful in poetry, particularly when the meaning isn't clear itself. Next question, in the last verse, where does the turn occur? So what has changed in the relationship and why might this have happened? I did touch upon that briefly, but why do you think the relationship has shifted and changed? And what hints have we got as to why that shift has happened? Look at the organisation and structure of the verses. For example, look for enjambment, caesura, and the length of each verse. If you've forgotten what those techniques are, so enjambment is when the lines run over. As an example, sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising to his plod. Now this line carries over here. And the effect of this generally, we need to look at a couple of things. It's pausing here, so does this word here have any significance? And then it also means that the first word here is capitalized, dipping. So there's a real emphasis on that word there. And same in that last stanza, we look at the use of enjambment here. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping, always. The capitalization of the Y there really emphasizes the annoyance, perhaps, that he felt he gave to his father. Okay. Splats analysis. So this is really useful as a quick planning task for your unseen exam. If you spend just 5 minutes doing this, it will give you almost everything you need to know about the poem, and in essence act as your plan, a reference point to go back to, particularly as if we're going for the top grades in English, sometimes it's not the best idea to follow a sort of set structure, as in, right, I'm going to do 1 paragraph about language, 1 paragraph about structure, etc. The top students will have all of these ideas embedded throughout their response, and they will flow seamlessly between each of the assessment objectives. So they might be talking about language 1 minute, talk about another contrasting quotation later in the same paragraph. And they're automatically getting marks for structure there because they're commenting on how the poem is evolving and changing as it develops. So the response is seamless. Okay, so questions you need to consider and answer. What is the poem about? So what is the plot, if you like, or the main narrative of this poem? Why do you think the author's written the poem? Now, that's an incredibly important question to answer because we must always try and link back somehow or talk about what is the poet's intention. What does he want us to think or feel based on his work? Language. What type of language is used? Do you notice any patterns? We spoke about semantic fields. Is there a particular tone that you notice? Does that tone shift or change? And that obviously creeps into structure as well. Are there any particularly prominent language techniques or devices that have been used that really stand out? Audience. Who is the audience for this poem? And that links to purpose as well. So who is this actually aimed at? And apologies, my microphone just cut out there. So themes. What are the main themes within the poem? Structure. How is the poem structured and what is the poem's form? So you just do a few notes on each of those various topics and it will give you a fantastic foundation upon which to build. Okay, so just a few notes that will potentially help you with this. So we'll cover subject. So what is the poem about? It's the relationship. It's essentially about the relationship between a father and son and how this is changed by time itself. And it's also looking at how children or sons in particular look up to their fathers and their jobs and hope to aspire to be them. But ultimately, it's not always possible. And children will often feel like they can never match up to the standards set by their parents. And then ironically, it talks about how that dynamic shifts as time goes on. And actually, ultimately, it's the parents that rely on their children to look after them and follow in them. So it's all about the dynamics between the parent and the child and how that changes over time. The father is old and walks behind, and that's a role reversal. It recognizes how skilled farming work is, so it looks at that as well. Perhaps family traditions and family jobs and how they're passed down, and how actually sometimes that isn't always the best thing for the child, or even possible for the child to follow in their parents' footsteps. But it's also a poem about admiration of the parent. Okay, language. So things you can talk about for language. You can talk about the contrasts that appear throughout this poem. There's a real contrast between the past and the present. We spoke about that earlier on in this video. How that shifts as the poem goes on quite dramatically. There's also a contrast between the father, his power, his skill, and how that contrasts with the son's clumsiness. Metaphors. So what metaphorical imagery have we got going in this poem? The child following in his father's footsteps. The child's feet are not big enough. He can't fill his shoes. We've got some nautical imagery. So we've got words like breaking like a wave, child in wake, and that contrasts with the fact it's on land as well. So there's an interesting dynamic there. Perhaps that could symbolize how it's almost as if the son was never destined or able to follow in his father's footsteps, or that perhaps even he's almost in a way the opposite to his father. Specialized terms from plough and sock and headrick. So we've got real specialized terminology that's used in this poem, just to further emphasize the sheer skill that his father possesses in doing this job. So it links to that idea of admiration again. Lots of active verbs are used to show the physical nature of what his father does, and in contrast, how he responds to that. So words such as rolled, stumbled, tripping, yapping, etc. We've got lots of monosyllabic language used, often in rhyme at the end of line. And we've got some onomatopoeia as well, and that links to this sort of active verbs as well, really trying to bring this experience to life for us, and highlight the sort of visceral nature of the job, how sort of full on it is, clicking, pluck, yapping. Makes you quite uncomfortable as well, the onomatopoeic language that's used. Structure. So you may not have noticed this, but there is an iambic tetrameter, so like plod of plough. We've got rhyme. Sorry, just go back to that iambic tetrameter. That gives it a real structure, okay, like a real solid structure, a repetitive structure going over and over again. That could perhaps link to the repetitive nature of the job. It's almost like a sort of soldiers marching, and people know that. I think the word plodding is used, but this idea of just plodding, this incessant moving forwards with this job. It never stops, it never ends. There's rhyme in stanzas of 4 lines. It moves from the past to the present, as the poet does, and there's lots of simple, solid words. Okay, to get you started, obviously, if at this point you may well just be confident enough to jump straight into writing your own paragraph. However, and if you are, I'd recommend you fast forward this video till you get to the question, but if not, and you want a little bit more support and help and guidance, there's a couple of points I've picked out that could be good to focus on. So what you need to do here is find evidence from the poem that would support the point that I've made for you, and then give your own explanation and analysis. Now, this could act as a plan as such, or you may just decide to use these topic sentences to jump straight into your own paragraph. It is important for the explanation part that we do develop our response. I've mentioned this in previous videos. When you offer one idea, you need to try and offer as many as possible. There's normally multiple things you can say about a piece of evidence or a quotation, or even the point you make. There may be another piece of evidence that links to that or contrasts with that, and you should try and link that in. Obviously, for students who are just getting to grips with English and might struggle, yeah, it perhaps is best to follow a consistent structure. So make a point, give evidence, explain, develop it. But for those who are looking towards the top end of those grades, your answers really should just be free flowing, and you should be jumping from quotation to quotation, developing wherever possible, offering multiple developments. And you almost go in reverse. Your answer becomes less structured in a sense because you're jumping from different idea to different idea seamlessly. Okay, so the points that I want you to focus on. The son clearly viewed his father as heroic, godlike figure when he was younger. At times, the son clearly feels inferior to his father, as if he can't keep up. The relationship between the two seems ambiguous at times, and it is clear by the end of the poem that the relationship between the two has changed. So pause this video now, give yourself enough time to find your quotations for each of those points. There may be more than one for each point, and then write down your explanations. Resume the video when you're ready to carry on. So now we get into the question itself. The question I'm going to give you today: what thoughts on the relationship between father and son does the writer convey in the poem? A rather open and broad question. So it's very much your own idea and own interpretation. Go back to your splats analysis to help support you with this. Look at the themes you wrote down to help guide your response. And then give this a go. You should probably give yourself around 20 to 30 minutes and see how much you can write in that time. In 20 minutes, I would expect you to have a real thorough analysis of around 3 examples if you're really thoroughly analyzing. A couple of things that might help you. On this slide, we've got various points, various topic sentences, and some are better than others. So consider which ones you think will be a really good foundation and which ones wouldn't, and why that might be. And then you might decide to use one of these topic sentences to help you write your own response. So we're going to go on to our writing frame now. Remember, this is just a guide. You do not to follow this exactly, and you don't have to follow this order exactly. You may jump between ideas. They're really just sentence starters more than anything. The ones at the top, so in the poem, the poet presents, that really is the one that does need to go at the beginning, and that is normally followed by evidence. But here, as you see, I've put as seen by. If you're going for the top grades, you really need to try and embed your quotations within your response and not rely on a simple sentence starter like that. Wherever possible, embed the quotation in your response just to make your writing more fluid and seamless. A lot of students actually even embed the evidence straight after they've done their point. And here, as we go down, this is where you might focus on a specific technique. So it might be the rhyme scheme that you write in here. It could be the use of metaphors, so on and so forth. So that's really trying to get you to cover the assessment objective, looking at technical vocabulary and terminology and making sure that you're showing that you understand that and why it's used. And then the rest are really just sentence starters to help you with your analysis and encouraging. So these ones here, like they connote, this indicates, that's really just trying to encourage you to expand on your answer as much as possible, zoom in on keywords, key ideas, so on and so forth. Okay, so I did come up with some sentence starters that might help you if you're really struggling with this. So if that previous writing frame is still not enough for you, have a look at this slide and pause it, and this will hopefully give you a more solid foundation upon which to go. So these just give you a bit more and a lot more guided in how you might respond to this particular question. Okay, so that takes us to the end of this lesson. Please pop any comments in the comment section, any questions you might have. I'm also open to feedback, so anything that you would like to be included in future videos or anything you think I've missed that would be really helpful to you, please do let me know and I'll look to include that in a future video. And I appreciate you guys for watching these and attempting these lessons. So thank you very much.